Greetings sailors and welcome to another look at the Prinz Eitel Friedrich, because of course the campaign for you to grind this for yourselves has been announced. You will also be able to just straight up buy it if you want, but as a ship to grind out through a, well, it's not really a campaign. There is an associated campaign, but it's going to be a series of directives as they did with the Royal Navy event. I think it's probably worth your time. But there is one big caveat with this ship. Now I'm starting this off with me in a training room versus a Hakuryu, just to demonstrate the one truly outstanding factor, which you doubtless already know about, and that is of course the AA. Now this is with the AA range upgrade, AFT, BFT, and crucially manual AA. And as you can see, even though this is a bot Hakuryu, who manages to do a fair bit of damage early on, but I had some good practice dodging in this particular little session. I'm still shredding their planes. I am going to rack up quite a few plane kills by the end of this. Of course, the reason why I particularly mentioned manual AA is that the carrier rework is drawing ever closer. We've had various rounds of the test server, and one of the things that changed is obviously not just the carriers themselves, but AA and captain skills related to anti-air. And manual AA is a big one of those. It does still exist as a captain skill, but it doesn't work the same way anymore. It doesn't double your long range aura. And that's what this ship is all about. The mid and short range, compared to the long range, is quite mediocre in comparison. It really is all about that long range power. And so, although it will still be very good for being a tier 6 post carrier rework launch, it won't be anything like this effective. And it's not the only ship that's going to be affected by this, but it's just such a prominent feature of this ship that I felt it really worth especially highlighting. The AA is a big feature right now with manual AA. It can chew through many dozens of, well, tier 9 planes in this case, but it's just not going to be anything like as effective post rework. So just bear that in mind if you can, considering buying this thing outright on the premise that it has this amazing AA. It's not going to be nearly so amazing post rework. So just bear that in mind. I threw in this little bonus bit at the end, by the way, just to show off the secondaries at work, because the secondaries are also very good for this ship, although it's still a tier 6. You don't get nearly the benefit from the manual secondaries captain skill at tier 6 as you do at tier 7. It's what, 15% versus 60%? It's 4 times more effective at tier 7 than it is at tier 6. I've always felt that was a bit of a steep cliff edge, but anyway, never mind. So on to the bit of gameplay. I don't think it's really significantly changed since I played this. I've asked in the Discord, and maybe I'll have to drop a little note on the screen or something if there are any particularly big changes. But as I've pointed out previously, because I have shown this ship previously, the weirdest thing about playing it is the shells, the amount of drag that the shells have. Now it's a battle cruiser, it's got smaller guns, so it's 350mm, and unlike the rest of the Germans, in fact, it's basically unlike anything else on the German line apart from the York, which I have specifically compared it to. It suffers from this very high shell drag, which means that it has a sharp drop-off in its penetration over range, and it also needs a lot more lead than you would be used to from other ships. This game, however, this is basically going to be about as good as it can possibly get, because I'm going to get people showing me lots of broadsides, so I can use the AP shells effectively. Obviously, being top tier helps a lot, but also I am going to get a bit lucky with some of my shots. We're going to get a decent number of citadels out of it. And also, there is a carrier in play. And as this was during the period when this was being tested, they were unaware of just how effective my AA was. So just to reiterate, in case you haven't seen my previous video, or was it even videos? I think it was just the one I've done on this, although I really can't remember. I should have probably checked before I started recording. But it's one of those things, you know, you go through the checklist of all the stuff you want to try and keep in your head, and then there's always inevitably something you forget to look up. Anyway, but the guns. So, because of the nature of the shells, because of the high amount of drag, that has a couple of important knock-on effects. Now, if you're going to get somebody giving you a nice broadside like this at relatively close range, then the AP is absolutely your go-to shell. But at longer ranges, because of that loss of penetration, because of that high drag, you're going to find yourself using HE a lot more. Against cruisers, you can probably keep using AP shells at most ranges, although if you are down-tiered, there might be some cruisers that you would struggle with a bit with the AP shells, although I don't think there's anything that would be that difficult. So I would say yes, you could probably stick to AP against cruisers at most ranges. Against battleships, however, unless they're giving you a broadside, you're basically going to want to fire HE. Now, this New York at around 12 kilometers, that's probably around the limit of what I would be firing AP at. You could maybe try a little further away. But it's like the York, you know, the rule of thumb with the York is around 10 kilometers or less. And if you have broadsides, then even against battleships, yeah, you fire AP shells. Well, you know, you can fire AP shells against broadside battleships with most heavy cruisers and get a decent effect. But with the York, particularly above that around 10 kilometer mark, you're not going to have much success. So longer ranges than that, you just fire HE. And the Eitel Friedrich is really no different. And that's especially true when you are down-tiered. This thing, it struggles when it's down-tiered. I'm not going to lie. It's kind of like the Graf Spee, only bigger. And it has got 2 more guns. And it's probably got a better heal. Obviously, it's got more hit points and it's got amazing AA, at least for now. But you're still going to struggle a bit to really have an impact unless there is a carrier that particularly is being bothersome to your team, at which point your AA is going to become extremely useful indeed. This Kirov, by the way, I mean, this is the kind of thing I was talking about in this game. This was just... And you can see I was struggling a bit with my lead at various points here, giving a bit too much or not giving enough. It really does take some getting used to. If you're switching back and forth between this and other ships, it's going to throw you. It really is. So that carrier trying for a cross drop, and I've managed to wipe most of their planes, and also thanks to a defensive, I was able to dodge even taking a single torpedo. And it just hasn't been a worry at all, although I am getting focused rather hard here. This ship is not especially tough. I mean, it's got decent belt armor, but you really have to keep in mind that it does not have turtleback armor over the Citadel. You will get punished if you give broadsides to other battleships, and you will get punished very, very hard. And it's almost a little like the Nelson. If you're meeting higher tier battleships with their 15 and 16 inch guns, and they get a shot through your bow or stern, that's probably got a decent shot. Well, yeah, a decent shot at penetrating. So this is not the best situation right now. But fortunately for me, there's also going to be a nice little bit of teamwork upcoming with this Hatsaharu, recognising that I am in some slight difficulty and not able to get unspotted. And they're going to come and give me some smoke. And that's always nice to see. I can't fire while I'm in the smoke, of course, but it gives me time to get another heal going. So I've talked about being down-tiered a bit, and Obviously, as a tier 6 battleship, that's something you're going to have to expect on a reasonably regular basis. I think my advice would be just to play it very cautiously if you do. I mean, you've got a decent range with this. You don't get a spotter plane or anything to increase it, but it's good enough. Certainly for a tier 6 battleship, it's good enough. And so it becomes a bit more of a boring experience, quite frankly. You just have to stick at range and fire HE shells at things for the most part. Because of the accuracy, and if you've played German battleships, you know, the accuracy shouldn't be any particular surprise. It also doesn't cope particularly well with destroyers, but it does have those strong secondaries, and it might actually be worth relying more on the secondaries. It might well be worth trying out a secondary spec. Because, and this is true for other ships like, say, the Texas or the Cleveland when it was at tier 6, ships that have strong AA don't take long for that reputation to get around. It didn't take that long for people to figure out, oh yeah, I shouldn't put my planes near a Texas, they're going to fall out of the sky. And it'll be the same for the Eitel Friedrich. So it might almost be worth going for a secondary spec instead. And yeah, it's not going to be as effective as if it was at tier 7, say, but it's still going to give you a bit of bonus damage, and because it's a German ship with German secondaries, and yeah, it's a fictional refit, but I'm sure most people won't care that much. The fact that it has these much more modern secondaries, considering it's a World War I era battlecruiser, you can almost just rely on the reputation of it having great AA and not bother speccing quite so heavily into the AA, because it'll still be decent even if you don't spec into manual AA, although that's where the real power is. And I'll probably end up mentioning that again in my concluding thoughts, but just the loss of manual AA is going to change the nature of this ship, so I cannot emphasize that enough. If you're buying it for the AA alone, it's not going to be nearly as effective. So this one, it's, you know, we're winning. It was sort of reasonably, a reasonably tough fight, but I mean, you know, I was top tier. I had some assistance from allies when I overextended a bit. The guns have been relatively kind to me. I've gotten to shoot at broadside enemies, so I've got to use my AP shells a lot. This is really about as good as you're going to get. I had plenty of games where I was, you know, 40, 50, 60k damage. But, I mean, even if you get into a tier 7 game, you can still be reasonably effective. It's really, when you're down tiered, it's tier 8 games. It's tier 8 games where you're most going to struggle, and that's not unique to tier 6 battleships, or any tier 6 ships especially. But because of the nature of these guns, you might find yourself struggling a bit more than in, say, a Warspite or an Arizona. But of course, what this has that those don't have is that excellent AA. And of course the secondaries as well, although the Warspite secondaries are not bad. For a long time, the Warspite was the king of secondaries at tier 6, but really now it's this thing, if you care to spec into it. The thing is, though, if you do spec into secondaries, it's more of a secondary benefit. That wasn't even really intended to be a pun, but it kind of worked out that way. You don't really want to go charging in and relying on your secondaries to do a lot of work for you like you can with, say, the Scharnhorst, because you cannot stand up to the same amount of punishment. You absolutely cannot. So I've just about won this one. It's New York, again, very obligingly giving me a broadside. So obliging. If only all my enemies were like this when I play battleships, but that is, sadly, so rarely the case. Overall, I think this is an okay ship. I'm not especially in love with it, but I think for a tier 6 premium, for a ship that you can grind for on the campaign, yeah, it's okay. it's pretty decent, and if you're a fan of more historical ships, then maybe you want it for that factor alone, because we don't have a lot of pure battle cruisers in the game. And this absolutely is 100% a battle cruiser, albeit one with some fictional upgrades. So it's decent. It is decent. It can be frustrating sometimes with the guns. There will be plenty of times when you're firing a salvo and then thinking to yourself, what the hell just happened? Especially at close ranges, it's really fun when you've got somebody at like 5 kilometers closing the distance and you fire right at the waterline and everything falls short. Yeah. But that can equally happen in the Bayern as well. So if you are prepared for the German levels of gunnery, and if you can get your head around the extra lead that is needed, and I mean, admittedly, that can make it a lot harder to hit people who are actively manoeuvring. And you know, the opposite side of that equation is if someone's firing at you in an Eitel Friedrich, it's a lot easier to dodge their shots just because of the amount of lead time needed. But aside from that factor, or those factors, it just feels like a decent all-round ship. And I'm trying to not sell it. Well, not that I'm trying to sell it to you anyway, that's Wargaming's job, that's not my job, but I'm trying not to say, hey, here's this amazing AA ship, because, and I keep coming back to this, but that is going to change. That is going to so dramatically change with the AA rework. Manual AA is not going to be anything like the same skill it is at the moment, and that will hit the Eitel Friedrich hard. So, that's it for this. Well, not strictly a preview, but kind of this informational video, let's put it that way. Hopefully you have found it interesting and useful, and if you have, you could do all the usual things down underneath it. And of course, as always, stay tuned for more.